Chapter 4. Late in the evening, Maxim realized that he was fed up with this city, that he didn't want to see anything else but wanted to eat something. He spent the whole day on his feet, saw an extraordinary amount, understood almost nothing, learned a few new words by simple eavesdropping, and identified several local letters on signs and posters. Funk's accident embarrassed and surprised him, but overall he was happy to be left to his own devices again. He loved independence, and he really lacked independence all this time while he was sitting in Bejemetov's 5-story termite mound with poor ventilation. After some thought, he decided to get lost for a while. Politeness is politeness and information is information. The contact procedure, of course, is sacred, but there is probably no better way to obtain independent information. The city captured his imagination. He clung to the ground. All traffic here was either on the ground or under the ground. The vast spaces between the houses and above the houses were empty, filled with smoke, rain and fog. It was gray, smoky, colorless, the same everywhere, not with its own buildings, among which there were quite beautiful ones, not the monotonous swarming of crowds on the streets, its endless dampness, the unsurprising lifelessness of solid stone and asphalt. The same in some of the most important things. It looked like a giant clockwork in which there are no repetitive parts, but everything moves, rotates, clutches and disengages in a single eternal rhythm, the change of which means only one thing: malfunction, breakage, stop. Streets with tall stone buildings gave way to streets with small wooden houses. Crowds were replaced by the majestic emptiness of vast squares. Gray, brown and black suits under elegant capes gave way to gray, brown and black rags under tattered faded cloaks. A uniform monotonous hum was suddenly replaced by a wild cheering roar of signals, screaming and by singing, and all this was interconnected, rigidly linked, long set by some unknown internal addictions, and nothing mattered in its own right. All people looked the same, everyone acted the same way, and all you had to do was look closely and understand the rules for crossing the streets, how you got lost, dissolved among the others and could move in the crowd for even 1,000 years without attracting the slightest attention. This world was probably quite complicated and was governed by many laws, but Maxim had already discovered one, and most important, law: do what everyone does and just like everyone else does. For the first time in his life, he wanted to be like everyone else. He saw some people behaving differently from everyone else, and these people really disgusted him. They purled across the stream, staggering, clutching at people they met, slipping and falling. They smelled disgusting and unexpectedly. They avoided but did not touch them, and some of them lay flat against the walls in the rain. And Maxim did like everyone else. Together with the crowd, he ran into booming public warehouses under dirty glass roofs, left these warehouses with everyone else, went underground with everyone else, squeezed into crowded electric trains, rushed somewhere in the unimaginable roar and clang, picked up by the stream, came to the surface again, onto some new streets, just like the old ones, streams of people they split up, and then Maxim chose one of the streams and ran away with it. Then evening came when weak lights came on, hanging high above the ground and illuminating almost nothing. The big streets became very crowded, and retreating to this crowdness, Maxim found himself in a half-empty and dark alley. This is where he realized that he had had enough for today and stopped. He saw 3 glowing golden balls, a flashing blue inscription made of glass gas tubes, and a door leading to the basement. He already knew that 3 golden balloons usually indicate places where food is served. He went down the shredded steps and saw salsa with a low ceiling, a dozen empty tables, a floor covered with fairly clean sawdust, and a glass buffet lined with illuminated bottles filled with rainbow liquids. There was almost no one in this cafe. A loose old woman in a white jacket with rolled-up sleeves was slowly moving behind the nickel-plated barrier near the buffet. At a distance, at the round table, a small but strong man with a pale square face and a thick black mustache sat in a careless pose. No one here shouted, swarmed, or let out blue smokes. Maxim came in, picked a table in a niche away from the buffet and sat down. The loose woman behind the barrier looked in his direction and said something hoarsely loudly. The mustachioed man also looked at him empty-eyed, turned away, took a long glass of clear liquid in front of him, sipped it and put it in its place. Somewhere the door slammed, and a young and sweet girl in a white lace apron appeared in the Zaltz, found Maxim with her eyes, came up, leaned her fingers against the table and looked over his head. She had clean, tender skin, a slight fluff on her upper lip, and beautiful gray eyes. Maxim gallantly touched the tip of his nose with his finger and said, "Maxim." The girl looked at him in amazement, as if she had just seen it. She was so sweet that Maxim involuntarily smiled from ear to ear, and then she also smiled, pointed to her nose and said, "Glad." "Good," Maxim said. "Dinner?" She nodded and asked something. Maxim also nodded just in case. He smiled and looked after her. She was thin and light, and it was nice to remember that there are beautiful people in this world too. The loose ant uttered a long, grouchy phrase at the buffet and disappeared behind her barrier. They love barriers here, Maxim thought. They have barriers everywhere. It's like everything they've got here is under high tension. Then he found that the mustachioed man was looking at him. It looks unpleasant, unfriendly. And if you look closely, he himself is kind of unpleasant. It's hard to say what's the matter here, but for some reason he is associated with either a wolf or a monkey. So be it. Let's not talk about him. Rada reappeared and placed a plate of steaming meat and vegetable porridge and a thick glass mug filled with foamy liquid in front of Maxim. "Good," Maxim said and patted the chair next to him with an inviting pat. He really wanted Rada to sit right there while he was eating, telling him something and he would listen to her voice, and to make her feel how he liked her and how happy he was around her. But Rada just smiled and shook her head. She said something, Maxim understood the word sit, and walked away to the barrier. It's a pity, Maxim thought. He took a two-pronged fork and started eating, trying to form a phrase expressing friendliness, sympathy, and the need for communication from 30 words he knew. Rada, leaning her back against the barrier, stood with her arms crossed over her chest and looked at him. Every time their eyes met, they smiled at each other, and Maxim was somewhat surprised that Rada's smile became paler and more insecure each time. His feelings were very mixed. He enjoyed looking at Radu, although this feeling was mixed with growing anxiety. He enjoyed a meal that was unexpectedly tasty and quite nutritious. At the same time, he felt the oppressive gaze of the mustachioed man with an oblique and unmistakably caught his loose ant's displeasure flowing from behind the barrier. He carefully drank from the mug. It was a beer, cold, fresh, but perhaps too strong. Not for an amateur. Yuzatai said something, and Rada went to his table. They started a muffled conversation, unpleasant, but then Maxim was attacked by a fly and had to fight. The fly was powerful, blue and impudent. It seemed to be jumping from all sides at once. It was buzzing and howling, as if explaining her love to Maxim that she didn't want to fly away. She wanted to be here with him and with his plate, walking on them, licking them. She was stubborn and verbose. It all ended with Maxim making the wrong move and it fell into a beer. Maxim squeamishly moved the mug to another table and began to finish eating the stew. Rada came up and, without a smile, looking away, asked something. "Yes," Maxim said just in case. "I'm happy." She looked at him with blatant fright, walked to the barrier and returned, carrying a small shot glass filled with brown liquid on a silver platter. "Tasty," Maxim said, looking at the girl affectionately and concerned. "What's bad? I'm glad you can sit here to talk. We should talk. Don't go away." This carefully thought-out speech made an unexpectedly bad impression on Radu. Maxim even thought she was about to cry. In any case, her lips were shaking. She whispered something and ran away from the hall. The loose woman behind the barrier said a few indignant words. "I'm doing something wrong," Maxim thought with concern. He had absolutely no idea what. He only understood that neither a mustachioed man nor a loose woman wanted Rada to sit with him and talk. But since they were clearly not representatives of the administration and law enforcement officers, and since he, Maxim, obviously did not break any laws, the opinions of these angry people should probably not have been taken into account. The mustachioed man said something through his teeth, softly but with a very unpleasant intonation, finished his glass in one gulp, took out a thick black polished cane from under the table, got up and slowly approached Maxim. He sat across the street, put his cane across the table and, not looking at Maxim, but speaking clearly to him, began to press slow, heavy words, often repeating Masaraksh. Maxim thought his speech was as black and polished from frequent use as his ugly cane. The speech was black threat, challenge and dislike, and it was all kind of a strange idea. It was indifference in intonation, indifference on the face and the emptiness of colorless glazed eyes. "I don't understand," Maxim said angrily. Then the mustachioed man slowly turned his white face towards him, looked through him, slowly asked a question separately, and suddenly deftly snatched a long, shiny knife with a narrow blade out of his cane. Maxim was even confused. Not knowing what to say or how to react, he took a fork from the table and turned it in his fingers. This had an unexpected effect on the mustachioed man. He bounced softly, without getting up, and knocking down his chair, sat down absurdly with his knife in front of him. His mustache rose, and his long yellow teeth were exposed. The loose ant behind the barrier screamed deafening, and Maxim jumped up in surprise. Yuzatai suddenly found himself very close, but at the same second Rada appeared from somewhere, stood between him and Maxim, and began to shout loudly and loudly, first at the mustachioed man and then, turning, at Maxim. Maxim didn't understand anything at all, but the mustachioed suddenly smiled unpleasantly, took his cane, hid his knife in it and calmly walked to the exit. He turned around at the door, said a few small words and fled. Rada, pale, with trembling lips, picked up her fallen chair, wiped the brown liquid spilled on the table with a napkin, took the dirty dishes, took it away, came back and said something to Maxim. Maxim answered yes, but it didn't help. Rada repeated the same thing, and her voice was irritated, although Maxim felt that she was not so much angry as frightened. "No," Maxim said, and immediately the ant behind the barrier screamed terribly and shook her cheeks, and then Maxim finally admitted, "I don't understand." The ant jumped out of the barrier, never stopping screaming for a second, flew up to Maxim, stood in front of him with her hands on her sides and yelled, and then grabbed his clothes and began to fumble rudely through her pockets. Stunned, Maxim did not resist. He just kept saying, "Don't," and glanced plaintively at Radu. His loose ant pushed him into the chest and, as if she had made a terrible decision, rushed back over the barrier to her place and grabbed her earphone. Maxim realized that he did not have all these pink and green pieces of paper with purple prints, without which, apparently, it is impossible to appear here in public places. "Funk," he said soulfully. "Funk is bad. Go. It's bad." Then everything suddenly ran out of battery. Glad said something to the loose woman, who threw off her earphone, worshipped a little more, and calmed down. Rada put Maxim in his original seat, put a new mug of beer in front of him and, to his indescribable pleasure and relief, sat down side by side. It was going really well for a while. Rada asked questions, Maxim, beaming with pleasure, answered them. "I don't understand." The loose ant was grumbling in the distance. Maxim, tense, built another phrase and announced that it rains Masaraksh, bad fog. Rada laughed, and then another young and pretty girl came in, greeted everyone. She and Rada went out, and through for some time, Rada appeared without her apron, wearing a shiny red coat with a hood and a large checkered bag in her hand. "Let's go," she said, and Maxim jumped up. However, it was not possible to leave immediately. The loose ant screamed again. Again she didn't like something, again she wanted something. This time she was waving a pen and a piece of paper. Rada was arguing with her for a while, but a second girl came up and sided with her aunt. It was about something obvious, and Rada finally relented. Then all three of them bothered Maxim. At first, they took turns asking the same question in chorus, which Maxim, of course, did not understand. He just shrugged his arms. Then Rada ordered everyone to stop talking, gently patted Maxim on the chest and asked. Maxim? Maxim, he corrected. Mac? Sim? Maxim. Mac is not necessary. Sim is not necessary. Maxim. Then Rada put her finger to her nose and said. Rada Gal. Maxim. Maxim finally realized that for some reason they needed his last name. It was strange, but something else surprised him much more. Gal? He said. Guy Gal? Silence reigned. Everyone was amazed. Guy Gal, Maxim repeated happily. Guy is a good man. There was a noise. All the women talked at once. She was happy to fiddle with Maxim and ask something. It was obvious that she was very interested in how Maxim knew Guy. Guy, flashed in a stream of incomprehensible words. The question about Maxim's last name was forgotten. Masaraksh. The loose ant finally said and laughed, and the girls laughed too, and Rada handed Maxim her checkered bag, took it by the arm, and they went out in the rain. They walked all the way to the end of this poorly lit street and turned into an even less lit alley with slanting wooden houses on the sides of the muddy pavement, unevenly paved with cobblestones. Then they turned again and again. The crooked streets were empty, not a single person met on their way. Colorful lampshades glowed behind the curtains in the blind windows. Temporary muffled music could be heard, choral singing in bad voices. At first, Rada chatted vividly, often repeating Guy's name, and Maxim kept confirming that Guy was good, but added in German that you shouldn't hit people in the face, that it was strange and that he, Maxim, did not understand it. However, as the streets became narrower, darker, and slusher, the Rada's speech was increasingly interrupted. Sometimes she would stop and look into the dark, and Maxim thought that she was taking the drier road, but she looked for something else in the dark, because she didn't see puddles, and Maxim had to gently pull her to dry places every time. And where there were no dry places, he would take her under his arm and carry her. She liked it, each time she froze with pleasure, but she forgot about it because she was afraid. The farther they went from the cafe, the more she was afraid. At first, Maxim tried to find nerve contact with her to give her a little bit of vigor and confidence, but, like funk, it didn't work out, and when they came out of the slums and found themselves on a completely muddy, unpaved road, to the right of which was an endless wet fence with rusty barbed wire on top, and an impenetrable black, fetid wasteland without a single one honey, Rada completely withered, she almost cried, and Maxim, in order to cheer him up a little bit, started singing the funniest songs he knew at the top of his throat, and this helped, but not for long, only to the end of the fence, and then the houses, long, yellow, two-story, with dark windows, smelled of cooling metal, organic grease, something else stuffy and frequent. The lights were rarely and muddy, and in the distance, under some worthless blind arch, there were wet people standing, and Rada stopped. She clutched his hand and spoke in an intermittent whisper. She was afraid for herself and even more so for him. Whispering, she pulled him back, and he obeyed, thinking it would make her feel better, but then he realized it was just a reckless act of despair and ran on. Let's go, he said to her affectionately. Let's go, Rada. It's not bad. Good. She listened like a child. He took her, though he didn't know the way, and suddenly realized that she was afraid of these wet figures, and was very surprised because there was nothing scary or dangerous about them. Not so good, ordinary natives, crooked in the rain, were standing and shaking with the humidity. First there were two of them, then a third and fourth appeared from somewhere with the lights of narcotic sticks. Maxim was walking down an empty street between the yellow houses right at these figures, and Rada snuggled closer to him, and he hugged her shoulders. It suddenly occurred to him that he was mistaken, that Rada was trembling not from fear, but simply from the cold. There was absolutely nothing dangerous about the wet people. He walked past them, past these stooped, long-faced, chilly people with their hands deep in their pockets, stomping to warm up, miserable, drug poisoned, and they didn't even notice him, and Rada didn't even look up, although he came so close that he heard their unhealthy, uneven breathing. He thought that Rada would calm down at least now. They were already under the arch, and suddenly, ahead, as if out of the ground, 4 more appeared and stood across the road, as if separated from the yellow walls, just as wet and pathetic, but one of them had a long, thick cane, and Maxim recognized him. Under the peeling dome of the ridiculous arch, a naked light bulb hung out in the draft. The walls were covered with mold and cracks, and under my feet was cracked dirty cement with dirty footprints and car tires. They were flooding loudly behind. Maxim looked back. The 4 were catching up, breathing intermittently and unevenly, keeping their hands out of their pockets, spitting out their hideous drug sticks as they ran. Rada screamed and, squeezing, let go of his hand, and suddenly it became crowded. Maxim was pressed against the wall. People were standing close to him. They didn't touch him. They had their hands in their pockets. They didn't even look at him. They just stood and didn't let him move, and through their heads he saw that the 2 were holding Radu's hands, and the mustachioed man approached her, slowly put his cane in his left hand and with his right hand just as slowly and lazily hit her cheek. It was so crazy and impossible that Maxim lost his sense of reality. Something changed in his mind. People have disappeared. There were only 2 people here, him and Rada, and the others disappeared. Instead, creepy and dangerous animals trampled awkwardly and terribly in the mud. The city was gone. The arch and the light bulb above my head were gone. There was a land of impenetrable mountains, the country of Oz on Pandora. There was a cave, a vile trap set up by naked spotted monkeys, and the blurred yellow moon looked into the cave indifferently, and you had to fight to survive. And he started fighting like he did on Pandora back then. Time stopped obediently. The seconds became long, and during each one you could make so many different movements, hit a lot and see everyone at once. They were clumsy, these monkeys. They are used to dealing with other game. Probably, before they had time to realize that they had made the wrong choice, that it would be best for them to run, but they also tried to fight. Maxim grabbed another animal by the lower jaw, jerked at his supple head, and hit his pale throbbing neck with his palm, and immediately turned to the next one, grabbed, twitched, cut, and grabbed again, twitched, cut, in a cloud of fetid predatory breath, in the buzzing silence of the cave, in the yellow watery in the dark, and his dirty crooked claws tore his neck and slipped off. His yellow fangs dug deep into his shoulder and also slipped off. No one was around anymore, and the leader with a club was in a hurry to leave the cave, because he, like all the leaders, had the fastest reaction and was the first to understand what was going on. Maxim caught a glimpse of him, how slow his quick reaction was. The seconds passed more slowly, and the fast-footed leader could hardly move his legs, and Maxim slipped between seconds, caught up with him and hacked him on the run, and stopped right away. Time has returned to normal, the cave has become an arch, the moon has become a light bulb, and the country of Oz on Pandora has again become an incomprehensible city on a strange planet, more incomprehensible than Pandora. Maxim stood resting with his itchy hands down. The mustachioed leader swarmed hard at his feet. Blood was flowing from his wounded shoulder, and then Rada took his hand and, sobbing, ran it over her wet face with her palm. He looked around. Bodies were lying in bags on the dirty cement floor. He automatically counted them, 6, including the leader, and thought that 2 had escaped. He was incredibly pleased with Rada's touch, and he knew that he had done the right thing and did what he had to do, not 1 drop more, not a drop less. Those who managed to leave are gone. He didn't catch up with them, although he could have caught up. Even now he could hear their shoes knocking in panic at the end of the tunnel. And those who didn't manage to leave were lying, and some of them would die, and some were already dead. He understood now that they were people after all, not monkeys or armored wolves, although their breath smelled, their touch dirty, and their intentions were predatory and disgusting. Nevertheless, he felt some regret and loss, as if he had lost some purity, as if he had lost an integral piece of former Maxim's soul, and he knew that the old Maxim had disappeared forever, and that made him feel a little bit bitter, and this aroused some unfamiliar pride in him. "Let's go, Maxim," the Rada said quietly. And he obediently followed her. "You missed it, in short, you missed it. I couldn't do anything. You know how this happens. Damn it, Funk. You didn't have to do anything. All you had to do was bring your chauffeur. I know it's my fault. But who would have expected? Enough about this. What did you do?" "As soon as I was released, I called Meg. Mega doesn't know anything. If he comes back, Mega will let me know right away. Then I took under surveillance all the insane houses. He can't go far, they just won't let him, he's too conspicuous. Next up. I picked up my men to the police. I have ordered that all violations of order be monitored. Including traffic violations. He doesn't have documents. I have ordered me to report all undocumented detainees. He doesn't have a chance to escape even if he wants to. I think it's a matter of 2 or 3 days. It's a simple thing. Simple. What could be easier? Get in a car, go to the TV center and bring a person here. But you couldn't even do it. It's my fault. But this combination of circumstances. I said enough about the circumstances. Does he really look crazy? It's hard to say. Perhaps he looks more like a savage than anything else. On a well-washed and well-groomed knotweed. But I can easily imagine a situation where he looks crazy. And then, that eternal idiotic smile, that cretin babble instead of normal speech. And he's all kind of stupid. It's clear. I welcome your measures. And here's another thing, Funk. Get in touch with the underground. What? If you don't find him in the next few days, he's bound to show up underground. I don't know what a savage should do underground. There are a lot of savages in the underground. And don't ask silly questions, but do what I tell you to do. If you miss it again, I'll fire you. I'm not going to miss it a second time. I'm happy for you. What else? A curious rumor about the blister. About the blister? What exactly? Sorry, Wanderer. If I may, I'd rather whisper it in my ear.